So in terms of the work we do, a big part of that is outreach and engagement, and our BioBlitz is a really big part of that. So every year we have a BioBlitz, which is where for a period of 24 hours, we try and record as many species as possible in a certain place, which is the University of Kent campus. And we're extremely lucky to have lots of cool biodiversity surrounding us working here. The one last year had 593 participants. So again, it's open to everyone. You'd be very welcome to join us. And again, in terms of save the date, so the next one is going to be 17th of May. So if you'd like to sort of get hands-on involvement on understanding about species, recording species, then please sign up for all the different events, and it's designed to be very child-friendly as well. Our research, and I'll look at Shane while I say this, I think it's been our best year for publishing in high-impact journals, to the extent that I had to make them all small to fit on this page. So these are articles in Science, Nature, and other journals with a high impact, and they sort of illustrate the different topics that that we do at DICE, and yeah, it's the result of a lot of very hard work from colleagues, and we published a whole set of other articles as well that are just as important but slightly less famous. So yes, so it's been a busy year, and all of that work has also been covered in the news, whether it's been work on genetic rescue of Arabian leopards and looking at tigers, to big broad projects like the work of Jake Bittner and his colleagues on showing that conservation works if you fund it properly, and also work looking at well-being and how people perceive forests, woodlands in the UK that Zoe Davies has been leading on. For our students, we've been very fortunate last year to receive a large grant from the Not So Orm Sands Foundation in memory of Charles Burnett III, which a very generous bequest to fund master's scholarships at DICE and also a set of scholarships for rangers at the Southern African Wildlife College. The photo there shows our 6 scholars from this year who are doing the masters at DICE together with Melissa Murdoch, who's one of the trustees of the fund. And we are currently advertising for, in fact, no, not advertising, I need to select them. We are currently going through the process of, I do the long listing, then as a panel we do it, it's all above board. Yeah, so we're in the process of selecting the students for next year. Also with studentships, we received a grant led by Zoe Davies from the Leverhulme Trust for PhD studentships. So this has been the first year that that's been running. So we've had 5 people funded for PhD studentships and 3 master's studentships, and we are for this one currently recruiting to have a set of PhD students for the following years, focusing on sharing space for nature and multifunctional landscapes and understanding how people and nature can coexist. We also had some really nice news that Reshu Bashal, one of our master's students from a few years ago from Nepal, has been shortlisted for the Whitley Awards, which are also known as the Green Oscars. So on Wednesday, we'll find out whether she's been selected as one of the set of people who will get funding for their awards. But even being shortlisted is a real, yeah, a real triumph. So it's great that she's been able to do that. And yeah, unfortunately, on a much sadder note, last year we saw the passing of one of our alumni, Elva Gamita, an amazing Indonesian conservationist who a set of us at DICE knew. I first met her, 2001, I think it was, when she was working at Kerinci Seblat National Park. It took a while before we were able to get funding for her to come to DICE, and she was an amazing conservation scientist who, yeah, unfortunately passed away last year. Matt Strubig wrote a lovely dedication to her, where she says, yeah, she was not only a brilliant conservationist, but also a kind and inspiring colleague whose legacy will continue to inspire. And those 2 photos, I think, really nicely show the 2 sides of her, one very happy and one in the field on a very steep slope, stuck in the middle of nowhere, doing some cool science. And in memory of her, the prize that we're giving to the master students, it will now be named in her honour. So it's really nice that we can, mark her career in that way. Yeah, on to happier stuff. The other thing that happened last year was the beginning of our E3 Sharing Space for Nature project. So this is funded by the UK government, the Expanding Excellence in England Award. So that began last August and will last for 5 years. And it's meant that we've been able to fund 21 new staff, which is why that slide at the beginning was looking so crowded. And it means that we're doing really interesting and we hope important work on this idea of sharing space for nature, that we have a set of ambitious targets and a realization that we need to have more land and sea that's managed for biodiversity, for nature recovery, but recognizing that to do that obviously involves sharing that land and sea with people. So the project has got 2 components, Cluster A, which is looking at nature recovery in southeast England, with a big focus very locally in the Blean landscape, but also doing work in Kent and Sussex. And then the other component is on international conservation and meeting global targets. So last November, we had a launch event where Neville Ash, who's the head of the World Conservation Monitoring Centre and a DICE alum, gave a great talk putting things in context. And we've also begun to have a whole set of events and outputs and working with partners around the world. So there's a photo there of our first meeting looking at how AI might be used to analyse rewilding data. And our innovation team is already working with a set of organisations to help make sure that DICE's research gets translated into action. And the other thing about E3 is this focus, as I said, on nature recovery and rewilding and the exciting projects that are happening locally, a lot of which has been inspired by the amazing work that's done by Charlie Burrell. So it's fantastic that he's able to come here and talk about his work. So Charlie is the co-owner of the Knepp estate and chair of the Knepp Wildlife Foundation. He's also chair of Foundation Conservation Carpathia, on the advisory board of the Arcadia Fund, and on the oversight committee for the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes programme. And he's very kindly spent time with our students and some of our staff today when I've learned that there's an even longer list of things that he's involved in all around the world. His awards include the 2015 People Environment Achievement Award for Nature, the 2017 Anders Wall Award for Special Contribution to the Rural Environment in the European Union, and in 2023, together with his wife Isabella Tree, he received the Zoological Society of London Silver Medal for outstanding contributions to the understanding and appreciation of zoology. All of these roles and awards are a reflection of Charlie's hard work and vision. Things can often look a bit grim in conservation, so hope and passion are vital for turning things round and building a groundswell of support. This is an extremely exciting time for conservation in England, and Charlie and his team have played a major role in framing the discussion towards wilding and nature recovery, showing what works and inspiring people. I'm sure we're all really looking forward to hearing more about all of this work, so please welcome Charlie to give this year's DICE lecture.
I went up to Manchester a few months ago, and I was asked to give a talk. They've opened an exhibition about wilding at the university there. And it's sort of a year-long exhibition, and they've got a section of the exhibition is dedicated to Knepp. Anyway, I was asked to come up and give a talk. And I was showing this video when people are arriving, they're sitting down, they're wondering what they're going to see, and they were looking at this video. And I get sort of, I like teasing. Anyway, I was on my way to the talk, and I was looking up, is there any places in Manchester that might look like this? Water with some boats going past. Anyway, there is, I don't know if it looks like this at all, because all I was doing was looking at the map, and there was a place called, I think it was called Durrance Park, or anyway, there's a park in north west Manchester that had a big open space and had water and had a river, looked like a bit of a canal. So I was saying to the audience, Manchester, you guys are amazing. You've got Andy Burnham, you've got the whole future of the world mapped out. You're the driving force. You're the new London. You know, everything's going to center around you, and you've even got bison. And the audience were looking at, wow, you know, we've also got bison. I haven't seen it. Anyway, this is 30 kilometers outside of Rotterdam, and it's a scene that the people in their speedboats whizzing past are not even stopping to look at. And I guess that's my point about this particular. This is a video that I took on a trip to look at rewilding projects in Holland, and it just strikes me that we put up so many barriers to change. We're constantly saying no, wouldn't work here. It's not, you know, we have to do a lot of studies, we have to do a whole lot of work. But for me, it just seems that it's a pity we can't just move a little bit quicker. And that's my beginning of my talk. Knepp is 1,400 hectares in this part of Sussex. So you can see the map. It's 320 meters of clay cap over a bedrock of limestone. 10-acre fields is the average field size. So it's wheeled and clay with about, I guess, about 200 acres, a little bit over 200 acres of these lags, locally known as lags, these little flat floodplains around streams and brooks and rivers. Between the wars, that last big, deep agricultural depression, before fertilizers, before agriculture really got all the help it can get with subsidies and so on, this is what Knepp looked like. And this is the dig for victory. This is pulling out all the scrub that had formed on Knepp. And that was my uncle and my father and my aunts watching as small children the ripping out of that. This is a picture of the Canadian Army who were based at Knepp, and they were marching around, and they're standing in front of a wheat field. So this is the dig for victory as well. This is the beginning of the huge change in our attitude towards agriculture. This is production, production, production. You were sainted if you grew 3 blades of grass where 1 grew before. And this is a wheat field here. Sorry, yeah. I did 20 years of farming. I did 3 years at Cirencester. Then I took over when I was around 22, the farm, and I farmed for about 20 years. So I was producing milk. I was doing the arable and beef and sheep. One of the things that is good to display, I guess, is the fact that the so-called Green Revolution, this moment in time when we started to change our genetics of our plants that we were growing to make them better and more productive with the chemicals we were also developing. This is the great revolution, the Green Revolution. And if you look at the figures for Knepp, which is the green line, it's 2 ton, maybe just a little bit under 2 tons light of the national average by the end of the 90s. So we were struggling to keep up with the rest of the country, and that's really just to do with the land that we're on, very difficult farmland. We were also producing lots of milk, so about 630 dairy cows, and we were producing just over 3 and a bit million litres of milk, and the milk price was collapsing. So I was coming to the end of the 90s and wondering what I was going to do. And it wasn't going to be to do with farming, because we couldn't really work out without subsidies if we could keep it going. At the end of the 90s, I was meeting with several people in Europe, and one of the people that I came across was Franz Vera. And Franz had brought out a book called Grazing Ecology and Forest History. And this book was incendiary. The academics in England were going, God, Vera, he's talking a load of nonsense. And then they would say, no, he's not. He's the best thing that's ever come to our, There was a whole sort of a melee of excitement within the academic, a certain small sector, I imagine, of academia. And what he was talking about was looking at Africa, looking at America, big systems where you had herbivores at the heart of ecology. And he was saying, that's what we are missing in Europe. This is what Europe would have been like before we killed, eaten, and destroyed that system. And it was as simple as that. And for me, having come from Africa and Australia, my father having travelled, left England when he was quite young, I grew up partly in Australia and Africa. I was coming to this country going, well, yeah, that's sort of obvious, isn't it? And no, it wasn't. It was this argument about whether herbivores could drive ecosystems and whether they were suitable for temperate zone Europe. And so some of the thinking that came into play with Vera and learning about what he was talking about was actually thinking about what the losses were. And this is a nice schematic showing the megafauna that had been lost from different continents. And that sort of the beginning to understand that the patina of landscapes were driven by these animals that were mostly now missing. And that also started to feed into these ideas of what we could do in terms of a project about rewilding. I suppose the other thing we were also hearing, and Henry's put it in his book, this whole idea that the world has changed so dramatically, and the biomass of what's now left on this planet has changed so dramatically, and we've just got to think about how we're going to make space for nature and how we're going to run it. So one of the other thinking you're then trying to look at is looking at all the different mouthpieces that one could use in a project. So the browsing animals on the right, so these are animals that are just eating the woody shrubby plants, and the further right you go, the more they're just going to rely on those plants. And then the grass-eating animals or the montane animals and so on. Just that's the smorgasbord you were then looking at of using these animals as drivers for systems. But of course, and also looking at the past in this country. What were the species that might have been here? This is not an exhaustive list, but these are species that might have been present in this country. And then you're sort of trying to work out, well, what can we then bring back to then drive systems? So these are the ones that we identified as possible animals to bring back to UK. But the auroch was gone, extinct. The wild horse was extinct. So there were proxies of those, yes. The other animals, like the wild boar, the moose, or the elk, as we would call them in Europe, and the bison were all part of the Wild Animals Act 1976, where you can't have them where there's humans. So there was a whole load of things that we couldn't use in our project. So we could use proxies, so the wild boar, the Tamworth pig, and so on. So these are the animals that we came up with as our drivers, our systems. And obviously the rabbit was already there, and the roe deer was already there, but the other animals we then brought in as the drivers to create new habitats for the future. We are now known as being a site where the densities of breeding songbirds are probably the highest in Britain. We are now a site where you will see not a few purple emperors, but hundreds of purple emperors. The explosion in life that has happened at Knepp in its scrubland, driven by these herbivores, is extraordinary. And if you're ever wanting to hear a soundscape that I can't find anywhere, and certainly in Europe, where you have the same soundscape as a dawn at Knepp in May, I suggest you make your way over in a month's time and come and experience it. So it's gone from these arable fields to this scrubland. And I'm guessing the Africans amongst us will go, what the hell is this guy talking about? We've had a meeting earlier on. This tiny little pocket of land in Sussex with this bit of scrubland appearing, what could it be? But actually what this is a huge beginning of a movement, and it's happening and it's happened. And that's what's so exciting. So this, if you look at the oak tree in the background, this thing here, and you can just see what's happened to that landscape. So the scrubland, the mosaic of habitats, the scale of it is important. All of this has given this extraordinary explosion in life. And that a very odd looking landscape as well for this country. Very familiar in Africa, the browsed thorn and the mosaic of pathways made by animals and so on is quite familiar. But in this country, it doesn't seem to be at all familiar. And so when you do come, you will suddenly go, wow, that is a very odd looking landscape. And this is in England. So I think it's that, our senses, our smells, our hearing, our visual effects of different landscapes can be really very powerful in teaching us something about ourselves and what we've done and how we've managed our landscapes and what we're allowing to happen. But on the science, we have, when I referred to one of the highest densities of breeding songbirds in Britain, this is Tony Davis sitting down on a chair. He's been ringing birds for about 30 years, and he has rung more whitethroats and blackcats in a couple of weeks than he has in his entire career. So I'm not talking about just the biodiversity coming back, but I'm also talking about sheer volume, sheer quantities of life that has poured back in. And it's not only the breeding birds in the spring, but it's all these migratory birds that are then fattening up on all the scrubland before they head off to Africa on their migration. We haven't got this university working with us at the moment, or have we? Yeah, a little bit, okay. But I haven't put you on here. We've got these universities working with us. We're doing destructive sampling. We've got flux towers. We've got drone. We've got LiDAR, point cloud. All these things are going on at Knepp. And the chap on the right-hand side, or my right-hand side, yes it is doing the destructive sampling. He's taking out roots and all, about 300 trees we removed and then looked at the carbon in them. We have got my daughter's PhD, which she's just managed to get through her Viva, and she's now, I think, passed it all. And she was doing this work on destructive sampling. So she was taking up these 300 trees, looking at the carbon below ground and above ground. And it's looking like about 4 times as much as we thought stored carbon in these systems. So that's very exciting. We've also been looking at 1,100 core samples, a metre deep, and we've been looking at the four samples from each of these 1,100 samples and looking at the carbon at depth in the soils on the grassland. And 5.2 tonnes of CO2 equivalents per hectare per year is an astonishing figure for just the soils in the Rewilding Project. So a big report and very exciting, and and it's on our website, and it's also published as well, so you can download it and see the data yourself. We've pulled together all our data. We have 2 full-time ecologists, and they have been working on and about to launch a website which will have stories. Very important to actually tell stories about the data. They will have the species spotlights and then the actual data themselves, all the reports. So that'll all be published in the next few months, we're hoping. It's taken about 8 years to get to where we are now, and it seems to be very difficult to do, but I don't know quite why. Just thinking a little bit then about rewilding and where it sits in the bigger picture. I don't know if you saw this report, the Paulson, Cornell and Nature Conservancy report about the funding gap for nature. I just want to sort of highlight that, and the question that I was being asked quite a lot by some of the students today was, how are we going to fund this? How are we going to fund restoration? So if it's a $8 billion funding gap on the planet, we then asked Finance Earth to have a look at what the funding gap on the same basis as the Paulson Institute's work was done, and looking at the funding gap that might be applicable to our country. And we were looking at this idea that it might be around about 6 billion needed to stop and start to rebuild nature in our country. And as you know, we're going in the opposite direction, I mean, certainly from the government. So how else are we going to find the funding to help us move this on? The Lawton report in 2010 started me thinking about the visualization of what the Lawton report was talking about. The Lawton report then fed into the 25-year environment plan. And again, what you were hearing was a whole lot of academics and policymakers and civil servants talking amongst themselves and coming up with lovely big reports, but you actually had no idea what they were talking about, and most of us didn't. And actually visualizing that and making that actually real for land managers is really quite important. So I was then going through this process and thought that I'd come up with my own version. And I first of all started to draw it myself, but I was so crap at it that I then moved on quickly. Now this is a picture of a real picture, Cumbria. It's got exactly what I wanted. It's got what looks to be not like quite intensively farmed farmland. It's got some roads. It's got a canal, so a river that's been canalized, and it's got maybe some interesting stuff in the background which may be rich in nature. So I wanted to then paint the Lawton, the 25-year environment plan onto a landscape. And I had the help of Jeroen Helmer, who's a Dutchman, who's an ecologist, but also an artist. So if I just start off with this picture, building this picture, if you imagine there is these core bigger, the more bigger, better joined up. The Lawton report talks about more bigger, better joined up. The bigger is the areas in the background. They may not be rewilding, they may be just conservation areas, but they're sort of 2,000 to 5,000 hectare areas. We just got to imagine that's possible in our landscapes, in all our ecoregions. And we need to join them up. And the corridor bit, the joined up thinking. But obviously you come across instant problems where you have infrastructure stopping corridors actually happening. The reason behind the corridors, this is this little schematic. I was again trying to work out how to bring it home to people what a 2.3 degree change in our part of the world would look like. And so I then thought, well, the south of France would be basically southern England, and southern England would be up in the borders. So that's the rate of change at 2.2 degree change. That's about 5 to 7 kilometers movement a year in temperature. So the corridor idea, I guess, is easily explained, or it's probably not ecologically correct, but it's easily explained by this fact that we're needing to adapt our landscapes to change, and that change is coming whether we like it or not, and we need to be able to allow life to move throughout our landscapes. So the corridor then means that we've got to do something about the connection, and all around the world they have thought this one through. I mean, I think in Holland alone there are 72 green bridges or eco bridges. Traveling north of Champagne, you can drive through a landscape, once you've passed the Champagne, you drive through that landscape there, and every 5 kilometers there's a green bridge. You know, we have done it. We've got this happening in Europe and the rest of the world. They are expensive, so you can't build that many of them. You've got to be quite strategic about it. But they are one of the things that we need to think about if we're going to reconnect landscapes. The other thing that is corridors is our hedges. This is about a 14-meter wide hedge on Knepp. It stopped growing any further out because the herbivores have stopped it in its tracks. But it has in a 170-meter hedge, it's got 3 territories of nightingale, and the dormice have come back. So even these hedges also are part of the reconnecting, the corridor effect. So this landscape is beginning to change. It's got some hedges, it's got some billowing out hedges, it's got a corridor now, it's got these rewilded sites either side of the valley system. Now we're going to talk about the margins. And we, as farmers, we have been persuaded to put in these margins. I'm not quite sure what they're about, why they, we get a bit of money for them and then put them in, and then we might plough them up again because things change and governments change and so on. But they do work. There's been a very long study now done by the RSPB with Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and they work. So on this particular 1,000-hectare showcase, they gave 8% of their land to nature in terms of these margins, and the overall effect was no loss in calorific value. In fact, some of the crops were improved. Beans, for instance, went up by 36% in yield, just because the predators were there and the system was there to help producing your crops. So in this landscape, I've also put these margins, which we're being paid to do. The big, I guess, revolution is this thinking that we need to think about soil. And I asked ChatGPT before I came out tonight what regenerative agriculture meant. And this is what they came up with. And I thought, oh God, that is the problem. We, or conservation or other people that aren't farming and landowners, they talk to farmers saying, you should be doing this, you should be a regenerative agriculture. There's a big movement, don't you know about it? And they're going, what are you talking about? You have absolutely not a clue, have you? And I guess we go back to some sort of basic principles, and we're just thinking about how we can integrate that into all these different soils, all these different aspects, and all these different areas within our agriculture. But it is probably the most important thing of anything I'm going to say tonight. If we can get agricultural systems working with nature bleeding into productive land, then we're going to be on a win-win. It's still going to be ecology based on agriculture, but at least it's going to be a robust, interesting ecology in its own right. A lot of reading you can do on the subject. Passion of mine is wood pasture. I don't know, something about big old ancient trees. I sort of started to get really in love with these 20 years ago when going through Romania, when you can gallop your horse for an hour and a half and still be galloping through a wood pasture with 200, 300, 800-year-old oak trees. What an extraordinary thing it is to do. And so one of the things that I'm sort of promoting, the idea that eventually Knepp will be a wood pasture system. This scrubland on Knepp, this is our neighbour, this is our area where we top and mow, and this is the scrubland that's arriving. But within that scrubland, there's these just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of oak trees. And they're all sitting, some of them are grown together and they'll form a grove, and a lot of them are quite spread out and far enough away from each other that they become open-grown oaks. So the beginning of this, this is Grimsthorpe, Jane Willoughby's place up in Lincolnshire, and it's one of the great sites, I think, on the planet. It's about 500 acres of this wood pasture with 500, 600-year-old, 800-year-old oak trees, and it just looked so like the beginnings of what Knepp is now doing and trying to get to. As an idea, it just struck me that it'd be worth showing these pictures. So, wood pasture, WD6, for those of you who are farmers. We know what happens when you free those canalized river systems back onto the floodplains. It's one of the most astonishing things I've ever done. It just that, we did a 2.5 kilometre stretch of a river that had been canalized and pushed it back onto its floodplain. And there are instant results, and life just starts pouring back in. This is very, because Heron is Dutch, so he's put in things like, he's got the otters, but he's got his beaver dam with his beaver being stalked by a lynx. Why not have lynx in this country? I don't understand why we don't. He's got his, aurochs, and he's got his fighting, he's got his elk, and he's ort bison and wild boar and all the things you're probably terrified. Anyway, and he's got people. Now, come on, what's not to like about that, as Dieter Helm always says. So this is our 2.5 kilometre stretch, and we put in the diggers, and we've got the system all working to naturalise that river system. A comment from a friend of mine who came to look at our £300,000 project on rewiggling the river, and he was saying, what a waste of money, what a waste of public money, what a waste of everything, time and effort. You could have just had some beavers and it would have happened. So this is some shots of our beavers at Knepp, where we have them, and they've, in a 6.5 acre pen, they've built 3 dams and this enormous lodge. And when we say as busy as a beaver, I mean, they are just relentless. I mean, they just never stop. This is them. They built a little ditch canal to take all the vegetation back to the lodge. And this is the lodge. They're sort of putting material on top of the lodge. And here's this sort of 3.5 metre high lodge built on their dam. What extraordinary things they can do. We have a film of a 4.5 pound sea trout running up over the grass over the system from pond to pond. It's extraordinary. Anyway, love the beavers. So the water systems we can do things about. And next week there's a big conference in Brighton that I'm talking at, which is all about rivers, and the River Restoration Centre is all meeting there. And what they do is incredible. And what's happening out there, stage 0 or whatever it's called. Is it called stage 0? Anyway, all these wonderful things that are coming up with our rivers. Not talking about the pollution. Agriculture. And so this picture, I wanted to include hay meadows. I want to include cultural landscapes as well in this picture. One of the things that you all know is we've lost 97% of all our hay meadows. And there is this drive to bring back some of those systems. Let's support that and let's get those hay systems back again. What's not better than those sheep in the picture and the cattle eating rich, herb-rich swards again? So I think that's also worth paying for. I've also put in here greenhouses. I think we're going to have to start growing more things in greenhouses. So I've put them into the picture. And then we're also challenged by the other ideas. Precision fermentation. I don't know if you've been following that at all. This idea that George Monbiot has been promoting these ideas that actually what we need to do is come up with systems for proteins, carbohydrates and fats that are grown in vessels just outside our village in a big tank with yeasts that are genetically modified so that they can produce this, and then you can add them to processed foods. And he may be right. It's all this idea of how we make more space for nature. How are we going to do it with a growing population on the planet? On the fly farming, I've got a friend who is on a board, and they invested about 15 years ago in a fly farm in Canada. And he went back there just before COVID, and he said that he couldn't see the end of the building without a pair of binoculars. The scale of what had happened with just producing maggots for protein was just beyond anything he imagined could be possible. So it's not happening, it's happened. So we just got to embrace these ideas and think about what it actually means for us as humans eating all these weird and wonderful things. Woodland plantations. This is the last bit of this particular section. And this is the idea that we plant and get grants for planting single species in little plots or big plots, doesn't really matter, and what that actually means for nature. And I travel a lot, and one of the things that seems to be a no-brainer to me for both timber and for firewood and for wildlife is continuous canopy cropping. And that promotes this very diverse and structurally interesting woodlands rather than these monocultures. I was talking to someone who knows Thetford really well, and he said that in the last 30 years, the Corsican pine have not put on a single cubic meter of growth. Monoculture, disease, stopped growing. We can really create real problems with our systems where we just think about single species planting in big blocks. And the Forestry Commission has been spending a lot of time and effort thinking through that and what we're going to do in the future. And we keep on going. We keep on retwiddling this landscape, reworking it, thinking how it could work and function better, reconnecting it. We don't just stop. So I guess the idea that I've been promoting is that rewilding is just part of a mix of solutions. There's conservation at one end, there's the free flow and the free thinking of the rewilding movement on the other end, and neither are right or wrong. They're all important to this landscape, but also at the heart of this landscape is going to be the agricultural land, the food production. So that bleeding in of food, nature, and well-being. Just think of all the things that we're talking about here, the well-being that we're going to have from having this shared landscape with nature. Just coming to Sussex, I'm looking at my time. This is the Wheel to Waves project. Some of you may have heard of it. This is the Knepp Rewilding Foundation we set up about 3 years ago. And the Knepp Rewilding Foundation, one of its projects was to set up the Wheel to Waves. And the Wheel to Waves is a 100-mile corridor. And the idea was born out of meeting a farmer down on the Climping Gap. This particular farmer here is called James Baird. He has about 1,600 acres, and he's the last bit of agricultural land which hasn't been built on, between Worthing, Brighton, Bognor and Hove and all that area. This is the last bit of land that hasn't been built on. And James was reading my wife's book, Wilding, and he was, in that, we were sort of musing about this idea that one day, wouldn't it be extraordinary that cattle and pigs and our deer could wander down to the shore and beach and eat seaweed. And he rang me up and said, "I'm the seaweed." And I said, "What?" You know. Anyway, that was the beginning of it. And then we also were thinking, well, yes, the Sussex Bay project, the Help the Kelp project, all those driving back, the trawling and dredging 4 kilometres from the coastline of that Sussex Bay, it will not recover in the same way if we can't do something on the terrestrial side. If we can't start to reduce pollutants and all the other things going into the coastal waters, then that benefit will not do as well as it would do if we did something else. So that was the beginning of the driver for me, to try to have that conversation about landscapes, terrestrial and sea, and the relationship of those two things, and waterways leading into the coastal waters. We have now thousands, I don't know how many, of people have signed up to the Wheel to Waves. And not on that map, this is this is last week's map, not on there yet, a whole load of things. I mean, we've got the entire community from there to here now signing up, all the way down the River Ada. We have got your local area here wanting to join through Wadhurst to Ashdown. We're going, well, there must be somewhere where you stop a corridor, but the willing partners and maybe some of you in the room, these ideas start, and you're signing up to just think, you're putting a baseline on a map saying this is what we have in nature, and then this is the program that is going to change and get better, and you're sort of just telling that story basically. This is the river River Ada as it leaves the terrestrial bit going down into Shoreham. So you will see the A23 again, visualizing these ideas and conceptually, it's all part of what we need to do. Tell people what it's actually going to look like, what it might feel like. Helps people then make decisions whether they want to see it or not. Money. I thought I'd better just put in money, because at the moment, so many questions. I had taken money out, and then so many questions that I was hearing from both the academics and from the students was about, how's it going to be paid? How's it all work? We started off, when I was farming, we had 23 employees, full-time equivalents. We now have 90. Nature has done that for us. We have 130 volunteers also in that mix. So a huge change in our business model and how it all works. We get about $250,000 a year from Natural England for environmental stewardship. We get a diminishing amount, which is then going to disappear by 2027, from our single farm payment, this basic payment. So that's used to be the big pot of money coming in. Now that's disappearing, and it's gone in 2027. We've converted a whole lot of farm buildings, which we then get a rent for. And we got 200 employees in those little businesses renting our old farm buildings. We have my son has set up a Wilding cafe and restaurant and shop, and they employ about 50 people, full-time equivalents. And he had 140,000 people came and ate a cake last year. Tourism, camping and glamping. This is a £1.2 million business. We have a 10-acre field with some tents that people come and put up themselves. And we have 9 units, which are glamping units. And then we have a safari business, taking people out in groups of 10 or 12 or 20, depending on what sort of safari you're going on. That's a 1.2 million turnover. We have released some houses because on the estate, we didn't need to have the farm manager, we didn't need to have the foreman, we didn't need to have the dairyman. So we released a few houses, which then we take rent for now. We just rent them out. And the estate's gone from 23 to 40 people. We have meat. We are needing to control the numbers of animals. You can't just let them grow in population until they swamp the whole site. So you're taking an amount of meat. And we've got 5 butchers working away all year round, cutting and processing meat and selling it either at wholesale or retail. The future, I'm hoping, because I've spent a lot of time and effort setting up 2 companies to do exactly this, is biodiversity credits, carbon credits and biodiversity net gain. But Knepp is also interested in how that might work for us. Again, wanting to show how it could work, coming up with the figures so people can see, and then trying to promote the idea that you can get nature to pay. Just a little bit on Knepp itself and on gross margins. So if you just took the farming operation and looked at the farming operation with all the things that I've been talking about, we did a comparison with Savills running it, and the outcome was those bar charts. So basically, Knepp now is twice as profitable as a grade 2 arable farm was in 2020. So nature does pay. You just have to think out of the box, have to think differently, have to think what your assets are and think differently about them. Okay, I can stop there, or I've got 5 minutes worth. I'm looking at the boss. Okay. This is a bit of work that I commissioned from Finance Earth, again, looking at a future funding stream, and I thought that might be interesting for you guys. These are all, I'm not going to go through them all, but I guess the biodiversity net gain is the one thing that is compulsory. Someone has got to pay for the loss of biodiversity on a certain site in terms of development. But these are all models that could be looked at for funding a project. What I'm going to talk about is the impact investment model, and I'm just going to move on to that. These are 2 companies that I'm involved in. I'm a founder in both of them. rePLANET works mostly in the tropics. We do have places in Romania, and we do have places in Scotland and so on, but it's mostly in the tropics. Nattergal is the one I'm going to talk about here because it's closer to home. And Nattergal, we created in 2021. We raised about 40 million, and we wanted to show how nature-based solutions could be monetized in some way. And so that was the idea. We wanted to buy some land. We wanted to, in perpetuity, keep the land for nature and work out a model that would allow that to happen and give a return to the people that then bought the shares in the company. Big ask. That's what we've set out to do. And this is the team that we've built over the last few years. And so it's a big growing team. It's well funded, and we've got some extraordinary sites. I'm just going to go through. This is the northern site. This is up in near Grantham, and it's 717 hectares. It's these heavy clays. Again, it's grade 3, grade 4 agricultural land, so not terribly productive land. It's the sort of estate that would kept on being sold. Someone would come along and say, well, I can farm this better. And it was 93% of it was ploughed, so nothing really much left other than a few scraps of very young plantation woodland and a bit of grassland, but nothing of interest really. And so we've taken that and we're going to be rewilding it, taking the local communities along with us. There's 4 communities on our boundary, and it's been absolutely fascinating getting those communities involved and then beginning to take them on a journey of what the change is going to happen all around them. And already this excitement of what's already coming back in, and what life is coming back into that site. Then there's the Fenland site, which is near Ely. And this is a really interesting site because it's surrounded by canals, rivers, and ditches. So on all 3 sides, you have a cut, which is taking water either to London or to the Wash. And you've got a river that actually goes over the top of the cut in a viaduct, which is called the Wissey. And then you've got this lode, which is a drainage ditch that takes the water to the Wissey. So we're sort of separated from all the hydrology around us. And we've been looking at, that's the plan, but what we've been looking at is looking at how the water is flowing in the site as it exists. We did our baseline surveys and we found not a single bird had nested on this 800 acres, not a single bird. We had a crane that nested on part of it and had a chick, but the chick then flew into a power cable and died. So it's a really sort of, it could be amazing, this site. And that's what we hope we're doing. So these 2 little lovely maps is showing temperature and water level. And with those 2 bits of data sets, we can then tell how the water flows underground through the site. So we can start to work out how we're going to wet it up and keep it wet all year round. Then we've got the new site, which is overlooking London. And there's, you can get on a tube in the city, and in half an hour you're out onto this site. And this is a sort of 500-acre site called Harold's Park. It was given by King Harold to the church in 1053. The church has sold it to us. It was in the wrong pocket. They didn't know what to do with it. We managed to get hold of it, and now we're doing a rewilding project on that. In my library, I have this wonderful book, the Saxon book, and it just shows where Harold's Park was, even on those sort of very old maps. So that's another vision for that bit of land, and it's so close to London, we're hoping a lot of people will come and see it. We're also hoping that the payments for BNG will be very good, because it's so close to London. Biodiversity Net Gain is going to be the major funder for the purchase of that and the subsequent work. This is, I guess, the main point. We've all got to have fun, haven't we, in life? And this is a friend of mine who actually smokes. No, he's a gin maker. He's a rewilder from Northumberland, and it's Heppel gin. If I'm promoting and flogging a gin, I haven't got shares in it or anything. But Walter Riddle is one of those joyful characters you find in the rewilding movement. And I think the joy that we all get and the hope we get from these projects is what really drives us and keeps us going. So I think hope is probably the message I want to leave you with. And thank you very much.